All right. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hello, wherever you are in this world. We'll get started here today with the kicking off Series 7. So we're for 2025, we're knocking on the door here. So Series 7, 8, and 9 will be our series for the upcoming year. As a reminder, we'll try to keep the palettes updated quite frequently over the next month here. There will be a second update in January. I'll touch on some elements and some things that we know there are known issues with that we're working to correct in more detail. But hopefully this presentation will be very beneficial to all of you and also kind of go through and discuss some of the rule changes, things from Series 6 that maybe there was confusion on, and et cetera. So thanks again for taking the time to be here with us today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into chat as I walk through everything. If I see it in the moment, and I'll try to answer it. And if not, then I will also go through at the end and go through the chat just to see if if I've missed anything. So, you know, I would love to answer as many questions as you have, as long as as we'll be here as long as we need to be to accomplish that as well. So, so the palette went live last week. So hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at it. Like I said, there are some issues that we've noticed with it, but we'll be correcting it. I think some of those are. I think like all the small tires are missing for some reason. So we'll have those updated here soon this week. I think there's some arch bricks that are missing as well. If it seems like it should be in the palette and it's weird that it's not, there's probably a mistake or an issue, and we'll have that updated here shortly. And also if you're on the forums, you can kind of see we're having some dialogue back and forth. All right, so we have submission intake is going to be the 20th through January 1st. So it's a typical Monday through the following Friday, 10, 11 days or so. So we'll look forward to seeing all of your wonderful submissions then. We have our crowd support and the voting, which will be open February 10th through February 21st. That's pretty fun because it also will overlap with the Series 4 crowdfunding that'll be happening in early February as well. We see quite a spike in engagement on the website during that period. Once we have that voting period closed, that'll go into review, where we review the finalists for about a month. We do test builds of a lot of models. We're checking with all of our internal teams for stability and what we're able to do from a portfolio standpoint. If there's we have to go through and kind of figure out all the scenarios, because we go through and see diversity of theme and sizing and whatnot. We announced those finalists March 17th. Hopefully we'll do that again through the live stream format. At least that's the plan currently. For those of you that joined us in November for that live stream, it was a lot of fun. And I think a good improvement on the process for us. So we'll try to be continuing to do that in that format moving forward. And then we'll start working on the models and work with the fan designers we have about 5 months or so that we work on the models kind of at a quick pace, just to get those in so we can finalize the bill of materials or the part list for those sets and the builds, because then we have to actually go off and finalize. Once those are finalized, then we go off into manufacturing of the actual elements themselves to make sure that when we go to manufacture the sets after crowdfunding, that there's enough of each of those elements to make the sets. So we'll go through there. Then about this, it'll be January 2nd or January 1st, whatever day of the week that happens. Typically, actually, it'll probably be January 2nd, unless it's the weekend. That's when you'll then see the latest or the final version of the Series 7 models. Pricing and images will be released for those, with then crowdfunding in February of the following year. So we kind of follow that same It's that same process every year. It's 1 month or 1 year from our submission intake all the way to when we do crowdfunding the following year, and then 5 months from there to when we go to manufacturing. And this is probably something too I should call out here, production and shipping. Please note that I'm sorry to the APAC markets, so Japan, Korea, Singapore, or sorry, not Singapore, yeah, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. Apologies, shipping is always a little bit longer to those markets because we don't hold any inventory in stock for the launch dates, if that makes sense. So, with a typical Lego set sold through Lego.com or retail, it's usually in warehousing for a couple of months and then it goes live. Well, we don't really do that for BDP. If the set's already sold, it's pre-ordered. As soon as it's available, we send it out. The first sets off the manufacturing line in Europe they go out to APAC, but because there's so few sets that we manufacture for BDP, they only get a couple of days head start than the ones that are going out to the rest of Europe and other parts of the world. So unfortunately, because of that, our friends in the APAC markets have to wait a little bit longer for their sets. That's something you'll see. It's, maybe an extra 6 to 8 weeks, just depending on what's going on in the world logistically. We saw it was a little higher this summer just because of some issues at the Singapore Harbor and Suez Canal, or not Suez Canal, the Red Sea. So yeah, so just to clarify, let everyone know that's part of the reason you'll see that for APAC every series that ships. But if there was anything we could do, we would try to make it faster for you. Okay, let's go to next slide. So please note we're on the forums. We're there all day, every day. So kind of this Q&A type format, it's there. We love to answer any questions that you do have. So we want to keep that conversation going. So if you can, please join us there. We're answering questions all the time. So some interesting stats from Series 6. So I think this is probably pretty good to share out for the fan designers so that you can kind of get an idea of where we're at from a makeup standpoint for the types of models that are being submitted. So you'll see kind of a return to norm for building, where building is the #1 category. If you remember for Series 5, Castle like skyrocketed to the top. It was like 30% of submissions or something crazy. And that was kind of due to the Wolfpack torso being included for the first time. That kind of normalized a little bit, so building kind of returned to the throne a little bit there. But what we'd like to see is, I know buildings and medieval and that kind of stuff is the most popular amongst the fan community, but it does seem like there's a lot of sentiment on, people wanting to see things other than that. And so it is up to the fans or the fan designers to design models that are not in those categories, to kind of satiate what all the fans are hoping to see. So, if you've been trying your luck at building and medieval castle and you feel like you haven't been getting through, then maybe try another category, because you might have a better chance of getting through because there's not as many participants designing for that specific category. And then also I reiterate this every series, and I feel like it hasn't really sunk in yet, but the 1,200 part and below, 400 to 1,200 part threshold or range is missing a lot of sets. So I think that is a great place to be designing in. And it would, there's the amount of models that we're receiving kind of in that range could definitely be improved. So would be nice to see some more models submitted in that area, because we typically don't see as many of those sets voted as highly. So if we can get some more models submitted in there, that would be great. So we'll get into some of the rules and guidelines that we're seeing. So it's kind of a lot of this is pretty standard from the previous series. From we introduced some sustainability guidelines for Series 6 and how the Lego group as a whole is moving towards. Things like military, religion, we try to stay away from. Religion is, we don't want to have any iconography, that kind of thing. General buildings and shapes are fine, but most things that are tied to iconography, like crosses and that kind of thing, we would stay away from. Anything that's modern military, we're not allowed to do. We talked about the sustainability stuff in the past. There are two new things that we're adding to sustainability. This did not impact Series 6, but it will impact Series 7 moving forward. And that is anything to do with kind of over depiction of logging and any kind of deforestation type things. This has not been an issue in the past. I don't think maybe there was a model or two. This doesn't mean you can't have axes or kind of like logs and splitting and that kind of thing. It's just over usage of deforestation, and then mines will be one thing too that will be added to the list. So for example, I think the mine in Series 6, I'm blanking on what the actual title of the model is now. I apologize. It's Mine Expedition, something like that. But moving forward, that model would not have been accepted. So yeah, Gold Mine Expedition. Thank you. So that's kind of an interesting wrinkle here. So moving forward, that would not have been an acceptable model, but it kind of just snuck in there for Series 6. So anything to do with mining is now being asked to stay away from. I don't know that doesn't necessarily mean mining equipment. But it is overall depictions or dioramas of mining. So then to get into the kind of always is third-party IP and internal Lego IP. So we try to stay away from the existing themes internally, like it's a yearly release within the Lego group. So Ninjago, Friends, Monkey Kid, the Modular. I'll get into Modulars again a little bit later to kind of show you depictions of, you can see what was accepted in Series 6. So that gives you an idea of what a difference between what the icons modular format is and then what we're allowed to accept. Because I think there was an overreaction to, we were banning all modulars. No, we're banning the modular format. That doesn't mean that you can't do buildings of that nature. There's just very technical details of that we are asking you to stay away from. And then avoiding brick-built Lego trademarks. So that's the 2x4 brick, the Lego logo, minifigures. So we can't do brick-built versions of any of those items. There's a new rule. This is a big one. So one of the things that we've been hearing, and I think this does make sense, the more that we have, or the more series go, the more repeat finalists we would likely have. And so moving forward, we will be having a limit on the amount of times you can be chosen per year as a finalist. So we think now is the best time to do this as we start a calendar year, so there's no confusion with it, and nobody's ineligible in the sense if you've already been working on something. So for the calendar year of 2025, a finalist can only be selected once per calendar year. So let's say you were selected as a finalist for Series 7. That means that you wouldn't be eligible to be selected as a finalist again until Series 10. And then, for example, let's say you were selected as a finalist in Series 9, which will be this next fall, which is, I think submission intake would be September of 2025. You could be selected as a finalist in Series 10. So even though it's back-to-back series, they're separate calendar years. So you don't have a 1-year cool-off period. It's just the once per calendar year, if that makes sense. So hopefully that will, we have some very talented designers out there. We want to continue celebrating those designers and give everyone a place to continue to actively participate and allow your creativity to inspire others. But at the same time, we also don't want to make it so that it's just the same few designers winning over and over again. Because I think at this point there are a handful of designers that have been selected 2 or 3 times when you look at the overall um, lifespan of ADP, the 2021 Invitational for BDP, so that's rounds 1 through 3, and then now Series 1 going forward of the BrickLink Designer Program. So hopefully that will still allow for competitiveness every year, but then prevent it from getting too top heavy in a sense. As a reminder, crowd validation votes matter the most. The amount of votes, this is purely democratic in the sense that the highest voted sets are the sets that will be selected first. And then we work our way down that list of votes to fill in kind of diversity of theme and the price points / part count, because we have to have a 2,500 part count average across the series for the selection process. Those are kind of the criteria. So if the top voted set is a 400 element set, and then the next one is a 4,000 fire, well, then both of those are in, assuming they're not the same theme. Typically, though, you'll also notice in past series, smaller sets or anything that's under 1,000 parts, we typically won't like thematic lock it in a sense, where you'll see for Series 6, there's off-road, off-road adventure and Sequoia Tree Trail, which are both kind of nature-esque. But we would say, well, one's more tree focused and kind of the national park aspect of it, and the other one's more about a vehicle being off-road and some of the things going on with that too. So they are different in a sense, even though they both are nature. So that we allow for a little bit more granularity there too, just because of, like I mentioned before, the amount of smaller sets that we do receive is kind of limited compared to the larger sets that can be selected. So we try to keep that open too, and we also don't want to prevent a small set from blocking a larger set too. So but again, we want to try to have a good, that could result in us having 2 small sets and 2 large sets and then a medium set, or you might see something like Series 4 where there's a bunch of medium-sized sets. It all really depends on what are the highest voted sets, and then that will influence the rest of the series. And because of that too, you might have bad luck where the model right above you is the same is that it could have had 50 votes more, and but it's the same theme, and so they had the first right of refusal in a sense. So some or another series they might have a bunch of sets that were voted above you, but the part count was too high for each of those models, and you were the next in the part count threshold. Like we needed a set between 1,600 and 1,200 parts, and everything. There could have been 20 sets higher. But there you are with your set. So sometimes it works that way too, where it kind of, the scales of justice can kind of go in one way or the other, and sometimes, I shouldn't say justice, the scales of luck can go one way or the other in a sense. So that's why we say keep submitting from series after series, because just because you missed out on one series doesn't mean that it didn't do really well, or there's some weird situation that popped up and just bad luck. So keep submitting, keep submitting, keep submitting. As a reminder, if your model is active on LEGO Ideas, it cannot be submitted to BDP. It's LEGO Ideas is as a separate program in its own sense, but also you'd probably want to keep your set on LEGO Ideas more than BDP, but at the same time too, we don't want to start cannibalizing models from them. It's okay if your model is rejected or times out and is not selected, then you can submit it to BDP. That's totally fine. There are some interesting scenarios where if it is for certain activities, it is not eligible to submit to BDP, but those are a little bit more rare in a sense. But if you're just submitting to LEGO Ideas actively in the main pipeline, then that's fine. It's good to go once you've either timed out or it's no longer or it's rejected. If you have a model that you're currently selling or you've designed and you want to dust it off or you want to modify it and so you can submit it to BDP, that's totally fine. Even if you're selling instructions for it on Rebrickable or something like that, it's totally fine. That's allowed. The only thing is that you have to have ownership of that model itself. You can't have licensed that model to some third party, and now that third party owns the rights to that model. We can't accept it then in that state. Um, and then when you're submitting your models, just make sure that if you have stickered elements in there, make sure you keep the custom elements in that model. I know it says and it flags that it's out of palette, but we recognize it, and that's how we're able to actually see the stickered elements and where they are in the model. So just ignore that little error, but make sure you include those in. So we're still at 36 countries for that can support BDP. I know there are many countries and people that are from outside these countries that would like to be able to purchase BDP sets. This is where you need to, make your voice heard with Lego and the Lego group and Lego.com team. Let customer service know that for your country, you would love to see a Lego.com marketplace. And if there's enough people from your country doing that, hopefully a marketplace will open up, and then that would allow you to purchase BDP sets. Otherwise, kind of the workaround is finding a friend or a relative in a country that can order, and then placing an order through them, and then having to arrange a third-party shipment to kind of go that final leg. Also, I know it's kind of multiple builds, 2-in-1s, 3-in-1s, that kind of thing. It's really cool and it's a lot of fun, but our program's just not set up for that right now. So we can't accept alternate versions of instructions at this point. It doesn't mean that you can't have them in mind with your model, but we can only accept one iteration of that model in a sense. And then also, most importantly, keep part count in mind when you're designing your model. The best feedback I'd like to give, or advice that I give to model designers, is you should be, when you're designing a model and it's finished and you look at it and you say, let's just use 10 cents per part. BDP is typically a little bit below that, but let's just use the ballpark number that the fan community uses. If I were to apply 10 cents per part to this model, let's say it's a 2,500 part model, would I be willing to buy this set for $250? And if the answer is no, then you should know, okay, well, what do I need to do to this model to make it so that I would buy this model for $250? Or you say, would I buy it for $200? Yeah, I'd buy it for $200. $250 seems overpriced. Okay, well, you need to figure out a way that you can reduce the part count on that model to try to get it to a tighter format. Because this is one of the biggest challenges that we have as AFOLs, is that when we're designing mocks, we have an unlimited part count that we can work with. Whereas here you're having to kind of work with more of the business side of things, where you have to say, or you have to keep in mind that the more parts you have, the more expensive it will be. And you could have a really nice looking barn, but if it's a 4,000 part barn, are people going to pay $400 for a barn? No, probably not. So, that will heavily influence the voting and the amount of votes that you'll see. So it doesn't necessarily mean that people don't like your model. It just means that at the current part count and from a viability standpoint, it might not make as sense to fans and the other fans that are voting on your model. So try to keep that in mind. Pricing and that kind of thing. Also, don't look at the cost in studio for parts, because that's totally based off of the BrickLink catalog, and it isn't relevant to, we're manufacturing the elements straight from the factory and what kind of thing. So that's not something you should take into consideration. Just kind of use that 10 cents per part rough cost. No, BrickLink, no, we can't send BDP sets to Costa Rica. They do not have a Lego.com marketplace as far as I'm aware. Like I said earlier, if you have a model that you kind of want to dust off, or you want to take a model from Series 6 to Series 7, just download or to pull down the drop down for the Series 7 palette. And then on the right-hand side, just above the step list, you can click a filter on, and that will show you all the elements that are currently in your model that are not in the palette. So it's easy for you to kind of go through and swap those elements out. And then this was a rule that we changed last series too. So I just want to reiterate on this again, is you can resubmit your model as many times as you want, as long as you are showing that you are iterating on it and improving it. Now, we've started providing feedback to fan designers. If you request it, if you go in and into your chat on your fan model, or if you go in the forums and in the feedback thread. You can request it there. You can email us at bdpsupport@lego.com and request feedback there on your model if it wasn't selected as a finalist. If you're making constant iterations and changes to your model, you can keep submitting it. There's no limit on how many times you can do that. If you don't make any changes to your model, let's say for Series 6 you submitted something, the palette's essentially the same for Series 7, you just resubmit it as is. That's totally fine. You can do that. You can do that twice. So you could submit a model in the same format twice. So then let's say you submit the same model from Series 6 to Series 7, and it's not selected in Series 7, well, you have to make some changes to that model for it to be re-eligible again for Series 8. And then you could not make any changes to that from Series 8 to Series 9, and then just make changes there. So it's not forcing you to do it every series, although, we advise that we'll provide feedback and input there. And so hopefully you're able, and new elements, maybe that adds some different options available for what you're able to do with your model. But yeah, hopefully you're not being forced to throw models out or kind of abandon them, but really hopefully refine them and build off of those. So, please don't remove arms, legs, hands from the minifigures, or from torsos and legs. So we can't use parts, we can't separate those elements. Same as this also applies to sub-assembly parts. So like think of like the 2x2 turntable, where it has the 2x2 base and then the 2x2 actual turntable element that clicks into it. Those are subparts. Things like the 1x1 antenna too, the lever antenna. We can't separate those elements out. Those are meant to be together. We call those subparts. So we can't swap out colors of hands or any of that kind of stuff. We have to use all the elements as they are. And then the number of minifigures in the model is based on the part count. So, if you have the smallest model at 400, we can have up to 3 minifigures. And then, it kind of scales off of that. This is a guideline that's put in place. This is just for intake. Now we can adjust things after the fact, but this is really put in place so that if somebody designs a 400 part model, they don't put 20 minifigures in it and it looks like a giant battle pack, and that's what gets it through the voting stage. If that makes sense. So. We do 1 sticker per 250 parts, so kind of similar exactly to how we do the minifigure thing. It just prevents models from just being covered in stickers if it's unnecessary. If you're allowed to have, now one kind of caveat to this rule is that these are for unique stickers. So you can have up to 25 stickers, I believe it's in it per model. But the amount of unique stickers you have is based off of how large your model is. So let's say you have a 400 part model, that would mean you could have 2 unique stickers, but you could potentially have up to, I think it's like 12 stickers that are duplicates of each of those stickers if you needed to for some reason. So it's not a limit on how many total stickers you can have, it's how many unique designs you can have for the stickers. And then also too, when you're designing stickers and kind of some of those elements, is we can't have more than one personal identifiable information included in that. So that could be a birth date, it could be initials, it could be a name, that kind of stuff. We can't have multiple types of personal identifiable information included. Those are regulations and guidelines that we have to follow. That's not even just a Lego group thing. It's a legal thing. So we can't have more information on there than that. So so if you have like a year on there, then it can't be your initials. I think I'll call out Nicholas for this. I think it was Merchant Boat where it had his initials and then his birth year on it, I believe. And so we had to change one or the other, birth year or the initials. So that's kind of a good example of that. And then again, this is a global design competition, so we prefer iconography instead of words. I know English, many people do speak English, but it is not the language that everyone speaks. So if we can change things out to have iconography instead of text, then that's typically preferred. It doesn't mean that doesn't count against you in any ways, but it is a way to make it a little bit more global in that sense. And then also note that all of our instructions and all the stickers will all be redesigned by Lego graphic designers. So please, if it's MS Paint, you're kind of just very basic clip art for your stickers. That's totally fine. All it is just kind of showing how you would like this to be set up, and then we will go in and kind of Legoize those stickers, if that makes sense. So. Um, One quick thing here, the studs and technicals. I will talk about this every series because continues to be one of the bigger hurdles of design is if you have a stud going into a technical like on the left-hand side, you can only have one element attached. It can't be multiple. So for example, where the two studs are stacked, it can only be one element by itself. It can't be supporting other elements with it. And then there are some non-Technic elements that have Technic-sized holes in them, and those holes in certain orientations cannot accept elements too. So, for example, the 2x2 round tile that has a Technic hole through the center. The top of that hole cannot take a stud because it overstresses the element that is inserted because the hole is rigid around the whole top of the element. But if you look at the bottom, it's okay to be inserted in the bottom because the bottom has only a thin ring going around the outside, so there's not too much undue stress on the element there. And same with the old 2x2 plate. The top of the element is solid, but then underneath there is just the single ring of support, and then that is able to be able to, it has enough give in it that it can accept that element there. Again, these aren't major issues, but they are things that we have to work to redesign. So if we can try to exclude those from the beginning, that would be best. Any types of issues like these won't prevent you from being a finalist. I want to make that very clear because I know we get a handful of messages every series where people find mistakes in their build and they're kind of freaking out because they're like, oh no, this can prevent me from being a finalist. That's not the case. We find a lot of issues in all of the models we select. It's whether or not we can easily fix it is the biggest issue. If it's something that just prevents the entire model from being built, then yes, that's a challenge. But we should have also tried to have caught that. We should have most times caught that in the initial screening when we're going before we approve your model. So we try to catch most of that on the front end. Acceptable. So okay. So getting back into the kind of the modular format and some of the confusion around what do we mean by that. So you'll notice that there was the Art Factory selected as a finalist for Series 6. It was kind of a happy coincidence that was because it also helps showcase what's a great example of what a non-modular looking modular kind of looks like, or this building that kind of has kind of that some of the iconography of it, but it is clearly meant to be different than a modular. So some cool things to note are the way that the building opens up. It doesn't mean that it has to open up like a book. You can still separate the floors. Separating floors is not something that's exclusively owned by the modular team. A lot of different things open up that way. We're not saying that you can't do it that way, but there are different ways of doing it where you can open it up, kind of split the model in half. You can have it kind of have like a bookcase open on one side where one of the wall panels hinges out. That was like in Brick Cross, that kind of happened. The way that the base is built is completely different than a typical modular. So getting away from the base plate. I know that it uses more elements, but if it's done, kind of like how Marcos did it with the base of the Art Factory, it can become a feature of the model in a sense too. So there's one way to do that there. The styling of it on the outside is different. I like to say if you have 3 out of the 4 sides of your building decorated, then that differentiates it from a modular. Because think of a modular is kind of just flat on 2 of the panels, and then the back may be recessed or out back, but it has a little bit of styling on it. If you have 3 of your sides decorated and there's things hanging off of it and it's not completely flat, then you're pretty much good to go. There should be at least space open on each of the sides. You can see here where, here's some other good examples of irregular base plate shaping that helps. that kind of avoids any modular aspect of it. With the kind of building all the way to the edge of the plate is another way of accomplishing that with kind of that New Orleans scene. The way that the arcade is done, it's a single story, but then also too, the way that the building is designed on all three sides and has open sidewalk on the sides. So again, that's staying away from the standard 32 by 32 or 32 by 48 with the technicals, the base plate looking exactly the same. As long as you don't do that, then that's all we're asking. So if you submit it and we think it's too close, we won't just flat out reject it. We'll tell you what we think you need to change just to make it approvable. And then we'll go from there. So real quick, so I touched on this earlier. There are some elements that are missing from Studio right now. We're working to get these implemented as fast as we can. Some of these are printed elements from the past. Some of them are new printed elements. We're trying to get these put in so that you can have access to them. If you want to use them as custom elements for the time being, you can do that. But these are just a couple examples of some of the parts that we'll be trying to add. These are available. We just don't have them in Studio at the moment. So you can't quote unquote use them as they are now. But if you wanted to create a custom element, a custom element in Part Designer, you could do that and use it as a stand-in for now. But I get that that's a little bit more difficult. So we're trying to get them in place just so you know that you can use these if you wanted to. So there's also kind of a couple different new element shapes that have come in. So those are things too we're working on. So some of these bows and wedge plates over here. There's the new molded version of the 2x2 macaroni element. So that's coming in. We have to get that element added in as well. So a handful of these elements that have been added recently, these are also in the pipeline to be added to Studio. The elements just don't exist currently. And again, so here's some of the torsoed elements too that are available. These are kind of some of the minifigure elements that are available that we just don't have those in Studio yet. So please take a look, and you can feel free to try to use a different variant of this, or you can use something as a placeholder until hopefully these get added in. So yeah, that's kind of my spiel for now. I'll go into some Q&A and I'll kind of backtrack and see what questions I've missed. I'm sure I've missed a lot of them. As I mentioned, Series 7 begins January 20th, so we're looking forward to having as many of you participate as you can. Yeah, it's been great. We're seeing, kind of series grow and grow and grow and grow from each series as we go. And so it's good to see the steady growth, but I also want to make sure that we are not over stressing or people are trying too hard to be involved in every series and having multiple submissions to every series. I get that it's a lot of time and effort to do that, so we want to be respectful of that as well. So don't feel like you have to participate in every series. We kind of outline when they are, so they're January, May, and September of every year. So if you want to plan out kind of when you would like to participate in each of those series, that's great. But yeah, we hope to see you around, but don't burn yourself out. All right, let's go up to the very top here. So, oops. Oh, we got some fans. Rhett, you're right down the street from us. See. Let me see if I can find any questions here. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat too. It's the opposite of Kickstarter board games where APAC usually gets them first. Yeah. Just depends on where geography is. And you'll notice too, in past BDP series, Europe always received everything first because the sets were all assembled and manufactured in Europe. But now that has changed. There is now assembly that's done in the US as well. So North America and Europe receive sets right around the same time. Unfortunately, APAC is, yeah, they have to wait for the container ship to get from Europe to Southeast Asia for those to go to be distributed. Looks like the categories. Okay, so the categories is well, the question was, where can I find these categories? So the only place that you could theoretically see the categories is under the filters tab on if you go back to series 6 or any of the other previous series and you go and look at all the models that were submitted, right next to the search bar there is a filter icon, and that allows you to view the models by their category. Just note that those categories are there as loose kind of buckets that we put each of the models into, so that it's easier to filter through. There's 300 models submitted, and let's say you're only interested in anything that is plant related or nature related, let's say. Uh, you can go through and select the art, floral, nature category, and then you can see all the models that would be interesting to you. It just helps you. So that might be 30 models out of the 300. So it just helps make it easier for you to sift through all the models if that's all you're interested in voting on. Um, it does not have, I want to reiterate that just because there is like sci-fi, fantasy, and space is all one category. Just because a model is selected from sci-fi, fantasy, space, and let's say it's a space model, doesn't mean that all the other models in that category are prevented from being a finalist in the same series. If it's one sci-fi and one space, as long as they're both not space related, then they're fine. This one could be, it could be, I don't know, fantasy or, like a great example would, I think it was series 5, where you had the Dracula mansion and you had, or Adventure in Transylvania, Dracula's kind of mansion castle. And then you had in the same category under sci-fi fantasy was Mushroom Village. Well, they're completely different types of models and they're completely different themes. They happen to be in the same bucket, but that's so we don't have 20 different buckets. We just made 8 or 9 buckets. So those categories are really only consequential for how you filter them out, but it's really nothing more than that. Don't you need to turn off sales during submissions? Yes, yeah. Go, great call. So the only thing, let's say you have a model on Rebrickable, and you submit it to BDP, the one request that we do have is that you just turn off sales for the entire time that you are in the submission process. So I think it's like 2 months max, where once that model is submitted and the voting has started, we just ask that you turn off the sales until either that model becomes a finalist and we notify you, or we notify you that your model wasn't selected, you can turn sales back on. So that way, we don't have people abusing the system where they're just using it to promote using BDP to promote their sales in Rebrickable or whatever platform you're using. I try to keep the part count low in models, but people get upset about open back buildings. Well, Rivendell's open back, and I don't know there's that many people that are too upset about that. I mean, there's a trade-off really, and that is how much detail can you have with something that's open back? I mean, Mushroom Village or Mushroom House was open back, and that had no problem, being voted up to the top. So I think it really just depends on the nature of the model. Any buildings that are going to go into a city, I think people are probably going to want to have a back on it, just because that, you're much more likely to take a building and put it into a city that you've already, a layout that you have. Whereas I know, like for example, let's just say modulars. Modulars go up against a wall. Typically, they're displayed that way. Well, there is a subset of the population that puts them into a city layout and then needs to have them be closed back. So buildings generally probably are going to be, or like modern human building type things, um, are probably more likely to be closed back, whereas other things could be open back, but it's really just preference. You see it both ways where we see pirate sets that are open back and closed back. It just depends, but it is a trade-off because there's a good part count cost that goes with it. Yeah. So just to be clear, it doesn't matter if BDP or sorry, if BrickLink operates in your country. It is Lego.com that is the important thing because Lego.com processes all orders. So, and then two, please note that let's say you have an issue with your payment, if payment declines, I know it's 5 months, and so let's someone took your credit card got stolen or you lost it, and so you need to change the payment information or anything like that, or you moved, maybe you moved in that time period. If you need to update your payment information, if you need to change your payment or your shipping address, contact Lego.com customer support. I know a lot of people will contact BrickLink, but we don't have actual access to update any of those things. It's needs to be done through Lego.com customer service. We'll gently let those people know, but just know that that's all done completely separately. It is Lego.com. As you said, designers can be only selected as a finalist once per calendar year. As Series 7 starts in January, then last year's finalists can be selected again, right? I mean, tough competition. Yeah, we're specifically doing it at the beginning of the calendar year, so there is no confusion about who can be eligible or who's not eligible. Everyone's eligible because it's a brand new calendar year. I know there's a lot of competition, but I think this is probably the best way to do that moving forward. Horses are not minifigures, no, and neither are skeletons. Babies, they're not technically a minifigure, so sure, they don't count. Minifigures are the standard, minifigure shape. So, and I think in the past we've also said that like statues aren't minifigures. So let's say if you use minifigure parts to make statues, just don't overdo it. Like just be smart about it. Don't put 10 statues in a set, like because then otherwise we're gonna be like, yeah, those are minifigures now. We're gonna just use a little bit of common sense with it. If we find parts and still produce at this year 2024, is it easy to put in the library? And also the library will be updated. Yeah, so like I mentioned, there are some parts that are missing that should be in there, like small wheels. I think most of the small wheels are missing. I don't know why. There might have been an info code issue with them. Um, or part numbers are updating and they're not linked appropriately, just as Lego's doing a lot of, or the Lego group's doing a lot of work to modernize tooling, and elements or raw materials are changing and all kinds of different things are happening. So randomly things will be missing, and we had 10,000, or I think there's 10,500 elements in series 7. So things slip through the cracks. Apologies, but just kind of use your judgment, and you'll be able to see like, hey, all of these are missing. Then yeah, there's probably a mistake there, and we're working to address those. The forums will have a lot of that information too. But no, just because it's in a 2024 set does not necessarily mean that it will be available for the series, because these sets will be manufactured in 2026. That means that all the elements that we are able to use have to be manufactured through the end of 2026. So you'll see things like minifigure series or CMFs. CMF parts are typically not available in BDP because they are only made for the 1 year. Same with Lunar New Year, and is it Lunar New Year and like gift with purchases and that kind of stuff. Those typically won't be available. And then some other sets, like some Lego City sets and whatnot, have shorter shelf lives as well. Those wouldn't be available. So if it's something that's been available for many years and it's still available now, well, it has a chance that it could be in, could not be, but you can't just rely on it being. It's in a 2024 set. It should be available. That doesn't necessarily mean it'll be in manufacturing in 2026. Okay. Looks like some people answered some questions about the production years versus 2026. What is stopping me from building a corner modular with a different base plate and keeping the attaching walls flat but adding windows to the side, or a corner modular where the walls open up from the front? I hopefully I covered this. Again, it's make sure you have detailing on 3 out of the 4 sides. I think is probably the safest bet for everything. You can't have the Technic connection plates. Make sure your sidewalks laid up differently. You got to have enough of a difference from it that it doesn't look like a modular in a sense. So there's I know that is confusing because you say all vertical buildings look like a modular, but there are very, minute details that you can change to make sure that it adheres to the rules. So much like some of the earlier examples I showed, you can build all the way out build all the way out, or you can cover the sidewalk. You can have your base be laid out differently. There's a lot of different things that you can do. If you're going to do something that looks similar to a kind of a 3-story anywhere, 1950s building. Let's see. Some of the more typical elements that should be in the palette, can we just use those pieces from the Series 6 palette rather than making custom element? For example, the 2x2 macaroni piece. Yeah, that probably is fine. Although that 2x2 macaroni piece is a little different in the sense that it's scaled, the size is a little different. So I know New Elementary did a really good write-up on it and showed kind of how all the different use cases and how it's different. Just note that it is a little bit different. If you build with that in mind, I think it's a plate thickness different in both directions. And so if you build with that in mind, then you can easily swap it once the updated geometry is available. Question about the new prints from Tudor Corner. Will they be available in Series 7? Mostly asking about the nice clock design. Yeah, they should be available. I thought, did I not have them? Oh, I know why. It's because it hasn't released yet. So that would be in the January 1st update. That's why they weren't on the slide. So yeah, so once those elements are released, so January 1st will be a big update because it'll be all the January 1st elements. So even though those photos are officially released, we won't put them into Studio until the actual set itself releases. So you can design with that in mind, that hey, here's an element I know that's coming. I've seen it in images that are on lego.com for a set that's releasing on January 1st, and you want to design with that element. You can kind of start designing with some of those things in mind, knowing that they will be coming January 1st. Does a set have 100% green light stability? Are connections pink? Oh, okay. This is a great question. So do not do not rely on the stability checker within Studio. It should only be used for reference. And what I mean by reference is if it shows something that's pink or red or whatever, just make sure if you have the bricks to build it physically, just test that little section or that connection point, because it's not 100% foolproof, and nor should, we don't really use it to check things, because I know there are things that, that it does really well, and there are things that it doesn't do well at all. So, we can use it to real quick see some areas, but I would not rely on that at all. You just use it as a reference to know, this says it's red, let me double check it. Because there are things that'll say are green that aren't possible at all. So, but there are thousands of, I shouldn't even say thousands, there are millions of different types of connections and usage features and everything. So you can't just rely on that alone. So any chance we could get Forestman, Black Falcon, or Torsos back in the palette? Nope, they're no longer available. for 2026. Can I make a spaceship with the same colors as the current city spaceships? Yep, you can definitely do that. That's totally fine. How often do portfolio conflicts occur? What percentage of submissions are affected? I'm not sure what the amount of percentage that are affected, but it's generally pretty low because we only check. We put together like a list of 20 to 30 models that we say, okay, these are most likely to be finalists, and we'll portfolio check those. And maybe a handful might have some kind of conflict with them. So it's not, I mean, sometimes it's bad luck, and then sometimes it's, there's a couple different things, but I didn't see any mid-length legs. Yeah, the mid-length legs might be missing right now, but they would be available. Uh, Dun, dun, dun. I've noticed that burps, lerps, and merps are back in the new palette. Is there a limit of those to use? Are they welcome to be used or rather frowned upon? Well, it depends on who you're asking. For me, you can use them. Yeah, have fun with them. The fan community might have a different reaction to it. So if you're overly relying on large, ugly rock pieces, then, maybe you might not get as many votes. But if you're using them in an interesting way, then that's probably fine. But there's no rule that says you can or cannot use a certain amount of them. I mean, obviously, if you use 4,000 of them in a set, that's going to make a huge model, and that might have some feasibility issues with manufacturing that we might have to consider. But as long as we're in the realm of reality, then it should be fine. How many of the submissions do y'all build during the review process? Top 20 or so? Is there any way we could get an indication of how close our previous submission was? I did get feedback, and the response was definitely close. How hard to know what that definitely means. So, like I said, anyone that's within kind of the top third in a sense. So let's say there's 300 sets that were submitted to that series. Anything in the top 100 technically has a chance, depending on what type of the theming, the vote count, or the amount of votes, how big the model is, or how small the model is. Because sometimes it's more about how small the model is than about how big the model is, and then the theme of the model. It can vary wildly from series to series. So that's why it's really hard to, and we don't want to share out exactly, like, oh, you were one away from making it, because that one away could be, or that five, it could be five away, but then the next series you were a finalist. So it's so variant based on what models are at the top and what part count and what theme they were, where you might get lucky one series and then the next series you're unlucky, or you could be unlucky for two series and then the third series that same model that that was performing well finally got its chance, and the gap was there for it to be selected. So it varies wildly from series to series. So that's why we try to provide more generalized feedback rather than saying like, hey, your model did well, but it couldn't, it's not viable. Well, it could be viable for any number of reasons from series to series. So again, the team will try to provide generalized feedback for why your model, what things we think you could do. But then sometimes we'll say your model's great as it is. It's just, so, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose type of thing. And it's all based on the luck. So, and then I think the second part of your question said, how important is it for castle medieval submissions to lean into factions? Seems that finalists are focusing on that rather than something more generic. Is that purely just a result of fan vote? That's 100%. So again, everything is fan vote. So what you will see is things that are generally more faction based will do better. But if it's a faction that's already been done, or it's a take on something that's already been done, it'll do well, but it won't do as well as something that hasn't been done yet. So you'll see that like with anything Wolfpack was doing a little bit better than, something that might have been Lion Knight or Black Falcon. if once, Mountain Fortress kind of was Series 1, so there was some Black Falcon stuff that would pop up, but then you saw, the Forestman Stronghold for Series 3, where, you know, people realized that I think fan designers saw that there was a need for a Forestman set because that hadn't been done yet in a kind of larger scale outside of a gift with purchase. So, that was probably a smart place to design a set for. Um, it all depends. If you're going to be competing in Castle and Medieval, you really should think about what sets your model apart and why is your model necessary in a sense. Because if it's just another Lion Knight castle, well, then you're going to be in there with a bunch of other Lion Knight castles, and there's already a Lion Knight castle that people can purchase. So from a general, it doesn't mean that won't, that aren't fans that wouldn't want yours. It just means that a majority of the fans, and you need to have the highest voted castle set typically. It's going to have to be, you're going to have to draw on a couple different things to get that to the top, if that makes sense. So thinking thematically about your model doesn't mean you can't do Lion Knights because Lion Knights has already been done. It just means think about medieval seaside market. It's doing Lion Knights in a way that's different from anything that's ever been that's being submitted, if that makes sense. So um what sort of things determine available parts in BDP? So we talked about that. I posted a question on Monday, 2 of this month in the forum about some parts, and I have not received. So we're going through all of those. So you should hopefully this week we should see some updates to the palette. Uh, duh, 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 duh. Yep. Yeah, the BrickLink office is in Irvine, California. Yep, that's where we are. Do we have any details like that? I can't see the rest of the comment. Like, yeah, parts that are available in the palette, I'm gonna try to interpret it. Parts that are in the palette that are currently in production have to be in a set that's live. There are not parts that are not being used that are available. It all has to be part of what BDP is that we are using all existing active elements only. And that's what allows us to manufacture sets so quickly. I'd like to know if a house got a roof which is just placed on top without a stud connection, like it's just slotted in, is that allowed? Yeah, that's fine. There are many different ways that you can do roofs, and connection methods for them. They can be, I've seen anything from the 2L rubber lift arms for Technic rubber lift arms. I've seen people use those. I've seen panels, where if you use a 1x4 panel at the bottom and that kind of just slots in against it, and that's what holds it in place. There's a lot of different ways of doing of roofs and having roofs attached. Um, Outlaw Forest Den will not include CM, yeah, we can't use CMF parts. Can you clarify the mining and logging rules? I'm working on a set with an underground cave section and wondering how to keep it legal. As long as it's underground, that's cave, that's fine. It's showing that it's being actively used as a mine. So the overt usage of a mine. So I think there's two models that immediately come to my mind. There's the uh, Gold Mine Expedition from Series 6. That is overtly a gold mine. So that wouldn't be allowed moving forward. And then there was another really cool model that was more of like a Wild West mine, and it had like a dinosaur skeleton above it. Loved it. It's a great model. Um, Very good part usage and also for the quantity of elements too. Shout out to that designer. I don't know their name off the top of my head. But then that too is kind of showing a mine entrance and is depicting a mine. That's something that we would stay away from as well. And that kind of covers all time periods. Now that doesn't mean, again, that doesn't cover mining equipment. So it's a bit of a it's just showing the active use of mining, if that makes sense. So if it's just an underground cave section, that's fine. Do, do, do. Could I include a smaller Lego store in a build despite a BDP set in the past being a modular Lego store? Yeah. So again, the Lego store is fine to do, and it also doesn't matter that there's been a BDP set in the past. We don't make anything that says that this has been done before. We're not doing that. It's only the only Lego things that we can't do are the trademarked brick built versions of the trademark. You can use the Lego logo on a sticker and that kind of thing, and we'll just make sure that you're using it appropriately. But yeah, that's fine to do, like the Lego store. Yep. Will the new botanical elements? Yep, those will be added. Um, is it allowed to show farm animals? Yeah, farm animals are fine. Domesticated animals can be shown, in a farm aspect. That's totally fine. The rule there that we had was for zoos and aquariums was to show the depiction of wild animals, or generally what's seen as a wild animal living in captivity. And I know there's probably some weird niches where it's like an animal hospital, or that kind of thing. Those, you might, I don't want to say you're playing with fire, but maybe you're flirting with the edge where, maybe it's something that is accepted or it's not accepted. It just depends on a case by case basis. So I'm thinking of like Jurassic World sets where they're like showing, rehab of an animal or a dinosaur in the wild or something like that. So if you did something like that, like maybe it's online, maybe it's acceptable. It would really just depend from a case by case standpoint. Um, Dun, 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 dun. Guidelines mentioned build order. Do the instructions also need to be fully mapped out, or only the steps? So, well, the two should be tied together in the sense. I think I understand what you're saying. Because there's the page layout and then there's the step layout. The step layout should generally get you there for the most part, like the full page layout and making sure everything's centered and all that kind of stuff. That's fine. You don't have to put a ton of effort into that, because we go through just the step view, and we'll cycle through and just see how things are built through the step view. It's a little bit faster. It runs faster. So for all the models that we need to go through, it's just a more efficient process. So as long as the steps are fully mapped out, that's totally fine. Oh, okay. So yes, something to talk about with the factions. So they're asking because there are rules about copying different Lego themes. Not clear on how that's applied, because people do make Black Falcon castles, for example. So to clarify, we are only asking that you do not use the names of factions in the titles of your models. That's all. It doesn't mean you can't use factions. It doesn't mean that they can't, be depicted in your model. You can't do a Black Falcon castle. We're just saying don't do a Black Falcon. Don't call the model and title it Black Falcon Castle. Call it Forest, or call it Mountain Strong or Mountain Fortress, for example, or Forestman Stronghold or Outlaw Forest Den. They're not, Wolfpack Forest Den. They're not Forestman's Stronghold. Does that make sense? So, we can't do, don't make a spaceship and call it the Blacktron Cruiser. You could call it, the Black Space Cruiser or something like that. That's totally fine. As long as you're not putting the title of the faction or, that kind of thing in the title, then it's totally fine. Because those are things we're trying to reserve out. So doesn't mean you can't do it as a subject matter. It just means just the title has to be modified a little bit. Yeah, the arch piece should be back in 60/60, the 1x6 arch. Yeah, that's one of them. I think there's a handful of arch bricks that are inadvertently removed, especially when it's all of a specific part. Then that's usually a good indication that it's accidentally left off. I did see that about 25% of finalists are designs that are submitted a second time. Art Factory, Brick Cross, for Stronghold, just for encouragement. Yes, exactly. Because like I mentioned, luck plays a good portion of the final selection, because, one series you might have had more votes than the other, but just based off of the makeup of the series, the model that you submitted it, the second time and it had a little bit less votes, but it had the space was open for it because we needed a model at 1,200 parts, and that was the first one available. So the more you submit, the better you have a chance. Especially if if you've only submitted it once and you can resubmit it again. I would almost always resubmit it, assuming that it doesn't take significant amount of reworks to do something, because the parts are, some certain parts aren't available. But you should always be resubmitting, because there is a chance that that you'll be selected the second time around. Is showing minifigures riding a horse considered? No. Okay. So yeah, we're getting into the weeds here with this, and it's like horses are fine to show. You're able to ride them. Ox can pull a cart. That's fine. That's not considered animal abuse. The animal abuse that we were worried about was showing, like depiction of dead animals and things like that. Again, this was not something that we had an issue with. It's just we're just publicly stating some of these things. They are not that we had outstanding or existing issues with them appearing in models. So as long as it's not over the top, then it's fine. As long as if it has printed decorations on it, just probably shouldn't show it being butchered. And that's generally the rule with food items, is that if it's like the fish, the fish or the crab, like it can be used as a food item on a plate. But if it has printed eyes, like let's say the chicken, you shouldn't show the chicken like with printed eyes on a plate in a sense. So you'd use the turkey drumstick or something like that. That's totally fine. Can you share with us just an average fan vote a finalist design receives? No, I can't, because we can't share fan vote quantities, because again, this, like I said, this is very democratic in the sense. So if you know the amount of votes that you needed, then it becomes easier to manipulate the system. So yeah, we don't share that. What I will say is that on average, you'll see at least 80% or above of the votes are like and love, and are not for me. So maybe 20% are not for me. So that is typically, I mean, that makes sense, because likes and loves count as positive votes. Not for me's do not count as negative votes. It's just a way for you to mark that's not for you, and for you to keep track of which sets you've voted on. But yeah, so that you'll typically see that there. If you ask for feedback, we'll generally tell you, or are you close to the top? Or we'll say, yeah, you're a little bit towards the bottom, but this is why, and this is what we would suggest you do to help fix that. So there are some things that we can do when we direct message you. I know you pictured and spoke about macaronis, but will their sister element, the 3x3, be available? Yes, the 3x3 I think is available as well. There might be a couple colors. I know we just received those elements too. So is a bar connection considered legal between megaronis? It's a funny name. So what I will say from a legal, not legal connection standpoint, anytime you put a bar into an axle hole, it cannot be solely relied on as a connection technique, because the tolerances on the axle hole and the tolerances on the diameter of the bar can vary. And if you have a overly, let's say you have a bar on the low end of the tolerance spectrum and you have an axle hole on the high end of the spectrum, the amount of friction between the two will be less. And so it can't be fully reliant on as an attachment method. So it really depends. If it's supporting a bunch of stuff off of it, then it's probably going to be a little bit more questionable than something that's just a decorative item in a sense. So it really is case by case, but that is something to consider if you can use a Technic pin or an axle instead of using a bar in a cross hole. Okay. I don't like to ask again, but I missed the answer on the loose roof on a building. Yeah, loose roof's fine. There's many different ways to connect roofs in, so no issue there. What about Lego character names in the description narrative? Yeah, again, same. I would stay away from that, and that's something we'd ask you to stay away from. So you wouldn't call it Johnny Thunder's, car or something. Um, we would stay away from Lego character names as well. Just to make sense, but just to make sure we can complete step editor and totally ignore page design, that would be a wonderful time saver. You can. I mean, it's not 100% necessary. And again, I want to make sure that we are respecting your time as well. So if it's something that, for some people it's easier to go through the page editors and just to double check and make sure that it looks good. But things like the rotation arrows and all the other kind of extra details that get added in, you don't have to worry about that stuff. Again, because they are being completely redesigned, we just want to be able to go through and just double check to make sure that the instructions are that the build flow is acceptable in a sense that this set can be made. And if there are issues in the model, then we can find a path to fixing them. So before we approve the model to be going into voting. So. Are old prisons hidden in the rock with skeletons allowed? Yeah, that's totally fine. Is there a way to put stickers on a convex piece? I'm trying to think of the full definition of convex. If it is rounded, if it is like the inside of a dome, you couldn't do it because it's curving in two dimensions in a sense. So think of like a final brick, the 2x2 dome, like an astromech, the dome that's used for the top of the astromechs. Oh, I have one right here actually. Like this element. You This curves in two directions in a sense that it curves, not only does it curve in this direction, but it's also curving in the opposite direction as well. So for that, we cannot add a sticker to this. Um, it can only curve in one direction. So for example, like an arch brick like this, you can have a sticker on here because it's only curving in one direction. Convex, I'm thinking of like the inside of the space shuttle. I think was it Discovery? It was from 2 years ago, I want to say. That has the big mirrored panels on the inside, or stickers on the inside for the radiators. That is on the inside of the panel, and I think that would be convex. Um, you're allowed to do that. I mean, that's fine because it's whether it's on the outside of the part or the inside of the part, as long as there is a panel there. Think about like the 1x6x5 panel, that wall panel. You can put stickers on the outside of it, and you can put it on the smaller portion on the inside too. So I think it would behave something like that. When you submit, it asks for the number of stickers. Is this the number of sticker designs or the number of stickers on the sheet? The total number of stickers you're using. So total, not just unique. It's the total number of stickers. Hi, do you believe we have a small boat part in the library? I don't think the boat is in the library right now. Dun, 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 dun. Is it realistically and BDP historically possible for someone outside of any previous public or social media presence to become a finalist? Yeah, yeah, it's very easily. There's two, if not more, that I can think of, finalists that are not on social media. So social media does not play as large of a factor in becoming a finalist as you would expect. So, like for example, Krakenator, the designer of Forest Stronghold and Thieves of Tortuga, is not on social media, has zero social media. So clearly, like you don't have to have social media to be a finalist. What we do see is that those who have large social media followings are typically have those followings because they're really good designers. But also we can see the amount of votes that are generated based off of them sharing links, etc. And what we find is that people who have large social media followings, on average, when somebody clicks on that link and then goes to vote on models or on that model, well, they will clearly vote on that model, but on average, they're going and voting on 80 other models as well. Whereas if someone comes directly to bricklink.com and then is voting on models, they're only voting on 50 models per average. So in actuality, we're seeing that the larger social media fan designers are better, or are having a positive, is what I should say, a positive influence in voting instead of a negative influence, where in the sense that they're only having kind of a whole bunch of one-off votes come in. That's just, we have not seen that, and it is something that we track and we factor in as well. So what is something that people will ask about a lot is comments. We do not factor in comments at all. And this is something we see in the comments all the time is, hey, this set has a ton of comments. Why wasn't this made? It has the most comments out of all the sets. Because comments are heavily influenced by social media. And therefore we do not factor those in. So just because one model has more comments than the other does not mean that it has no influence when we're selecting. Let's see. Yeah, social media following doesn't mean anything in my experience. That's good. Is it more beneficial to submit the design right as the submission opens? Do you get feedback from you right away or after the deadline? It totally depends. If you submit right away, you will have more time than everyone else to work on your model if there's any issues that we find. Now, it's kind of do you need more time to work on your model, or the more time you work on the model, the more time you add things, and then all of a sudden your part count inflates? It's all subjective. What I will say is day one, we get a lot of submissions. So maybe half, a third to a half of submissions come in day one. And so there will always be a delay, typically, unless you're like the first one or two submissions in, where there's still going to be a handful of days delay for you getting feedback on your model, whether it's approved or we need to make some work on it. If you submit all the way at the end, just make sure you've submitted the model by noon on that final day. Because if you submit it at 12:01, the system locks and we cannot add anything manually. It doesn't matter. If, let's say, you are 95% there and you're like, oh, crap, I need 2 more hours to finish this off, just submit it. And then we can say, you need to resubmit this. It's missing the instructions. And then you have a full another week to make sure those get done. So I'm not saying don't wait to the end. I'm just saying if you are working on something and you're like, crap, I needed a couple more hours, just submit it and then we can kick it back to you as well. So, but knowing that you have less time, you only have a week to get that done instead of, maybe 2.5, 3 weeks if you did it in the very front end. So we don't outright reject models unless you are blatantly not following the rules. That is, submitting models that are well under 400 parts, you are submitting models way over 4,000 parts, you are submitting intellectual property, or you're submitting stuff that are way against our brand guidelines. Outside of that, we will always give everyone the benefit of the doubt and allow you to make changes to your models to make them more, or to get them get them approved to go into the voting stage. Now, for Series 3, we were at like a 93% approval rate, which is really high. So I think, one, it goes to show how strong the fan community is from following the guidelines that we are putting out. But then also I want to say is that we're working with all of you to make sure that your models, you put a lot of time and effort into these models, and we want to make sure that you can get them through to crowdfunding. So we'll work with you on that. We're not going to just flat out reject things. We give you more than enough. We would give you a lot of space to get them in. So let me go down. Oh, we can't use any motorized parts, right? We cannot use motorized parts. However, if you see pneumatic elements, those are the only elements that we can use that have kind of movement built in a sense, outside of gears and that kind of stuff. You can have manually, crank gears and that kind of thing. Pneumatic hose is not available in BDP right now, or sorry, in Studio. It is available to use. This is a limitation. Again, one more thing I'm trying to get added into Studio. If you wanted to, I guess you could technically use 3mm tubing as a stand-in, because there is some, there are specific lengths of pneumatic tubing that is widely available, and you can find that based off of, if there are certain pneumatic elements included in the pallet, then okay, well, then those are in these sets, and so then that way that I'll know, okay, which pneumatic tubing from that set is available. And you can also reach out to us on the forum. We'll tell you exactly which pneumatic tubing lengths and colors are available. But that's the only kind of mechanical parts that are available to use outside of, I guess, technically spring-loaded shooters are also mechanical. But should we submit just one design even if we're working on two? I think Sushi Restaurant and Goldmine were the same designer. Yes, but Sushi Restaurant and Goldmine were the same designer, but it's a great case study in the sense that if one, let's say Goldmine couldn't have been selected because of, a portfolio conflict or something, something else that was in that historical era kind of category was, had 10 votes more. Well, then that other model would have got selected. But that doesn't mean, well, Sushi Restaurant could have been selected. So just because you submit two is, I mean, like, don't kill yourself with taking too much time working on two models. But if you have two models, or you have a model from a previous series that you're like, oh well, I have a new model, I just want to submit that, submitting both is not going to cannibalize any of the votes that you'll receive. So there's really no harm or foul for submitting multiple models, especially if you kind of have multiple models that you've been working on or have models in various states. So I mean, I would suggest it because it's just more likelihood. In the voting phase, are designs sorted by submission date? No, they're not sorted by anything outside. It's all randomized. So that's part of why we have the not for me vote, is because every time you come to the page, and for each person, wherever you are in the world, every time you come to that page, it's going to be in a new random order. And so that's why we added the categories, so it's a little bit easier to go through and vote on everything. And every time you go to the categories, it's always going to be in random order too. That way, if your model starts with A or the model designer's name starts with A, it's not always at the top. Can we request what category we believe our product should be in? Or is that simple up to the BDP? We just do it simply, but I mean, if you have something and you want to put it in the notes to the BDP team, you can do that. But it's relatively straightforward. There, maybe there's some times where it's a little bit subjective, but if you have one that you would request it to be in rather than another. And even then too, when voting goes live and you're like, it says it's in train, but it's a train station, but I'd prefer it's in building, we can swap it for you. It doesn't affect anything. Would be able to submit tomorrow. I don't know what that's in reference to. You can't submit your model until January, but if it's for part request information, you can submit it now. Both. What percent of missing incorrect pieces are you allowed to submit? 90% correct parts? Well, the answer is 0. What we want is, now that is case by case, because you might have custom elements in there because you're putting stickered elements in. Or the other thing that we'll see is if you release minifigure assemblies, those will also show up as outside of the palette. But we know during the screening, we can see all of the elements that's flagging as out of the palette. And if it shows hands and arm pieces and a torso without the arms in it, we know, okay, they just released the submodel. And so the palette checker is just seeing the individual pieces rather than the combined torso. We see that with plate hinges. We see it with turntables. and antennas and that kind of thing. So theoretically, you could maybe be up to 90% if you really got a little crazy with it, but we would know that those are all actual parts that are being able to use. You cannot have any parts being used that are not available in the palette. So if we see any that are like this is a reddish brown 1x1 clip and we know that's not available, or if it's on there, we'll know most likely it's because that part isn't available. So we would ask you to go swap that element out before we approve the model. So we won't randomly something might slip through, but 99% of the time, we will ask you to make a correction to the model to make sure that all the elements that you are submitting are available and are valid. Do lot count, number of unique parts matter? No, they really don't. And I think it's kind of probably creates more confusion than anything. So, that's something we've discussed replacing with the minifigure count instead, because that seems to be a lot more important for the fan community. Appreciative of the open can't talk anymore. Open communication you have with the fan community. Thank you so much. Yeah. So again, the whole reason we do this is, this is BDP is kind of our unofficial motto is for the fan community by the fan community. We're doing this for all of you here. So if you have feedback, if you have thoughts, concerns, things that we're doing well, things that we're not doing well, please let us know. That'll only allow us to get better. So you never see cannibalization of votes from the same designer? No, we don't. Last series is a great example of one fan designer had 3 models in the top 5. So it just does it. It's cannibalization of models is not a problem. And also for fan designers that are submitting models, the same model over and over again, it stays general. We see steady growth in voting because they're constantly working on the model, and then the fan community is getting more familiar with that model as well. So the saddle is not meant for the horse. It's the friend's saddle. I know that accidentally got through. It shouldn't be in there. It only works with the friend's horse. I don't think there's a saddle available for the horse, so you just have to do brick built versions of saddles if you wanted to show a minifigure riding the horse. So there's plenty of examples of ways that can be done. Looks like there are a couple more questions that came in. So agreed. I had the Wolfpack carriage and took it as more of a challenge for myself to participate. Thanks all for thank you for participating. If a model covers or could cover several categories, old bridge without, would you choose a category which would increase the chances for the set to be a finalist or make it a possible? For example, possible categories is already taken. No, we just have to realistically look at it and say what category fits this model the best. And then, like I mentioned earlier, some things that kind of blend across multiple themes or whatnot, we will take that into account if you are ever in a scenario where that model was potentially being blocked by another model in that theme. We're very practical about it and pragmatic, just looking at it and saying, are these two the same, or are they far enough away that they're not the same theme, even though we put them in the same category? So I wouldn't overthink the category part of it too much. So, yep, it looks like that's all of the questions I've had so far. Again, please feel free to join us in the forum. We'll answer as many questions as we can there. The recording of this will go live on the website this afternoon, along with the final rules updates and FAQ updates. But we should have covered most of the. Are there Q&A questions? Oh, okay. There, I didn't see the Q&A tab. Thanks, Sylvan. Appreciate it. Is there a way to give feedback on how popular a model was? It would be useful to know if my model is popular and I have a chance to with some rework. So yeah, I generally will give you feedback just on, I'm not going to actively discourage models because We can't overly rely on, well, this was half not for me's, half like it or love it, because it could be the renders that you used. It could be the part count was way too high. So I don't want to actively discourage any model and just say, yeah, the fan community didn't like it. I'm going to tell you these are the things that you could do to make your model more desirable, and then let you decide if you want to move forward with that from there. So real quick, it looks like there's some in the Q&A tab. Um, is it a problem if I use a different color than what is in the selection? Yeah, that's a big problem. We can only use the colors that are available in the palette. They have to be active elements. Question about the new prints. Yeah, so we talked about the two to corner prints. Am I able to import builds from Digital Designer into BrickLink? I would like to modify some builds. I don't know if you can go backwards from LDD into Studio, maybe from the legacy version of LDD. I only have our internal version of LDD, and I know we can't do that. You might be able to do it from the past. I think you can import LXF files, so LXFML files. So maybe there's a potential way to do it. You might lose some things, but yeah. Some of the more seasoned studio users might be able to answer that for you. Dun, dun, dun. Technic sets are a minority. Do you have percent lack of entries? We have very few Technic sets, and probably that's because Technic is very difficult to build and design. But yeah, that's we're definitely open to having more Technic sets. I think that would be really cool to see. So cool. All right, I think we'll end it there. Thank you everyone for your time, and we'll see you next time. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.